Picture yourself as a cultural historian in the year 2124, looking back at our present moment. You would likely be fascinated by a peculiar phenomenon that erupted in the early 21st century. The great literary civil war between authors and readers over who truly owns the meaning of stories. This wasn't a war fought with weapons, but with tweets, posts, and viral interpretations. Authors who had long enjoyed relative control over their works' meanings suddenly found themselves in an unprecedented situation. Their readers, armed with social media platforms and unprecedented access to global audiences, began crafting and sharing their own interpretations of beloved texts. These interpretations often directly challenged, and sometimes completely contradicted, the author's intended meanings. Consider the case of J.K. Rowling and the Harry Potter series. What began as occasional author clarifications about character backgrounds and plot points evolved into a complex battle over interpretation rights. Rowling's post-publication statements about character sexualities, relationships, and cultural identities sparked intense debates about whether an author's post-publication interpretations should be considered canonical. According to PEN America's research, these debates reached such intensity that they fundamentally transformed how we think about authorial authority in the digital age. But this wasn't just about one author or one series. The rise of platforms like Tumblr, Twitter, and TikTok created spaces where readers could share alternative interpretations that quickly reached hundreds of thousands of people. Fan theories became viral sensations, alternative readings gained massive followings, and suddenly, the traditional dynamic between authors and readers was turned on its head. This brings us to a fascinating question that sits at the heart of modern literary discourse. Who truly owns the meaning of a story? Is it the author who crafted it, the readers who interpret it, or perhaps something more complex, a dynamic relationship between creator and audience that evolves with each new reading? As we dive deeper into this investigation, we'll explore how the digital age has fundamentally transformed the relationship between authors and readers, creating what might be the most significant shift in literary interpretation since the invention of the printing press. This is the story of how the meaning of meaning itself became the subject of a cultural revolution. Before smartphones became extensions of our minds and social media transformed how we communicate, the relationship between authors and their readers was profoundly different. It's hard to imagine now, but there was a time when readers couldn't instantly tweet their reactions to an author or share their interpretations with millions of fellow readers in seconds. Consider Emily Dickinson, one of America's most celebrated poets. During her lifetime, she published fewer than a dozen poems. After her death, her sister discovered nearly 1,800 poems hidden in her bedroom. These poems, with their enigmatic dashes and unconventional capitalization, became a fascinating case study in how interpretation worked in the pre-digital age. Scholars, readers, and critics spent decades debating the meaning of lines like, "Because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me." Was this a romantic view of death? A commentary on mortality? A reflection of Dickinson's religious beliefs? Without the author present to clarify or constrain interpretation, readers were free to find their own meaning in the text. This freedom, paradoxically, led to richer and more diverse interpretations. The physical limitations of the pre-digital world actually encouraged this interpretative freedom. An author might clarify their meaning through interviews in newspapers or magazines, but these clarifications reached a limited audience and took time to circulate. Letters between authors and readers existed, of course. Mark Twain, for instance, was known for his extensive correspondence with readers. But these interactions were private, happening one letter at a time. They didn't instantly reach millions of other readers or become part of the public discourse around a work. The publishing industry itself acted as a kind of buffer between authors and readers. Books were typically marketed through reviews, jacket copy, and occasional author interviews. These controlled channels meant that most readers encountered a work primarily through the text itself, not through the author's ongoing commentary about it. This distance between authors and readers created what we might call interpretation spaces, gaps where readers could develop their own understanding of a text without immediate authorial intervention. Book clubs, academic discussions, and literary criticism thrived in these spaces, creating a rich tapestry of interpretations that could coexist without immediate challenge from the author. Imagine reading The Catcher in the Rye in 1951 without knowing anything about J.D. Salinger's reclusive nature or personal beliefs. Your interpretation would be based purely on your engagement with Holden Caulfield's voice and story. The mystery surrounding the author actually enhanced readers' ability to connect with the text on their own terms. This era was characterized by what literary theorist Wolfgang Iser called gaps in the text, places where readers must actively participate in creating meaning. Without constant authorial presence, these gaps became spaces for imagination and personal interpretation. Looking back, we can see that the pre-digital age's limitations created a kind of interpretative freedom that we might actually envy today. When authors were less accessible, readers had more space to develop their own relationship with texts. The question is, did we lose something valuable when we gained the ability to instantly know what an author really meant? Then came the social media revolution, and suddenly, the wall between authors and readers crumbled. What started as a trickle of author blogs and occasional forum posts transformed into a flood of constant, immediate communication. Authors could now instantly respond to readers' interpretations, theories, and questions. But this newfound connection came with unexpected complications. Consider George R.R. Martin's relationship with his readers. Through his LiveJournal blog, Not a Blog, Martin began sharing detailed explanations about character motivations, plot decisions, and the intricate history of his world. These posts became so numerous and influential that fans started debating whether blog entries about character intentions should be considered as canonical as the books themselves. But it wasn't just established authors who changed the dynamic. Social media platforms transformed how new authors interacted with their audiences. According to research on reading habits and social media engagement, by 2024, about 19% of book clubs were inviting authors to participate in their discussions, either in person or online. Twitter, in particular, revolutionized author-reader dynamics. Authors could now immediately correct what they saw as misinterpretations of their work. A reader might share their theory about a character's hidden motivations, only to have the author reply within minutes saying, "Actually, that's not what I intended at all." These instant corrections created a new phenomenon. Readers began second-guessing their interpretations, wondering if they should wait for author confirmation before forming opinions. The impact was profound. Instead of readers having time and space to develop their own interpretations, they could immediately check if their reading aligned with authorial intent. This led to what some scholars call interpretation anxiety, the fear of developing an interpretation that might be contradicted by the author. Take the case of literary discussions on platforms like Tumblr. When posts about alternative interpretations of classic literature went viral, reaching over 50,000 engagements, authors or their estates would sometimes step in to correct these readings. The digital age had created a paradox. Readers had more platforms to share their interpretations than ever before, but they also faced unprecedented levels of authorial intervention. This shift fundamentally changed how readers approached texts. Many began treating books like puzzles to be solved rather than works to be interpreted, searching author tweets and blog posts for correct answers rather than developing their own understanding. The average response time between a reader posting an interpretation and an author responding had shrunk to mere hours, sometimes minutes. The digital revolution didn't just change how readers and authors communicated. It transformed the very nature of literary interpretation itself. The question was no longer just, what does this text mean? But, what does the author say it means on Twitter? This shift would set the stage for one of the most fascinating literary debates of our time: whether constant author accessibility was enhancing or limiting the reading experience. As one literary scholar noted, "We've gained unprecedented access to authors' thoughts and intentions, but we may have lost something precious in the process: the freedom to read without the author looking over our shoulder." In 1967, a French literary critic named Roland Barthes published an essay that would become a cultural hand grenade. His argument was deceptively simple. Once a text enters the world, the author's intentions, biography, and personal views become irrelevant to its meaning. The author, Barthes declared, must die so the reader can be born. Think of it like this: when you tell a joke to a friend and they find it funny for completely different reasons than you intended, is their laughter any less genuine? Does their interpretation become wrong simply because it wasn't what you meant? When Taylor Swift writes a song about a breakup, millions of listeners find personal meaning in those lyrics based on their own experiences. These interpretations might have nothing to do with Swift's actual relationship or intended meaning, but they're no less valid or meaningful to those listeners. The song has transcended its origins to become something more universal. This brings us to a fascinating paradox in modern media: the rise of author interviews, directors' commentaries, and behind-the-scenes content. We've never had more access to creators' intended meanings, yet this abundance of authorial explanation might actually be limiting the richness of our interpretations. Imagine if every time you read The Great Gatsby, F. Scott Fitzgerald popped up to explain exactly what the green light meant. Would this enhance your reading experience or diminish it? Consider how differently we engage with works where the author's voice is absent or intentionally silent. Harper Lee rarely commented on To Kill a Mockingbird, leaving readers free to find their own connections to Scout's journey. The relationship between author, text, and reader isn't a simple transmission of meaning from writer to audience. Instead, it's more like a conversation, where the text acts as a meeting point between the author's creation and the reader's interpretation. When J.K. Rowling tweets about Hogwarts plumbing systems, or George R.R. Martin blogs about character motivations, are they enhancing their works or inadvertently limiting their potential meanings? According to Barthes, these after-the-fact explanations might actually be constraining the the very thing that makes literature powerful: its ability to mean different things to different people at different times. Shakespeare's plays continue to speak to audiences in ways their author could never have imagined. The Bible is interpreted differently by each generation of readers. Ancient myths take on new meaning as societies evolve. So when we talk about the death of the author, we're not suggesting that authors don't matter. Rather, we're recognizing that great works of art have the capacity to mean more than their creators intended. It's an expansion of meaning, not a limitation. In killing the author, we give birth to countless possible interpretations, each as valid as the last. If you want to understand how reader interpretation exploded in the digital age, look no further than Tumblr. This platform became ground zero for what we might call the great democratization of literary analysis. Here, far from the ivory towers of academia, readers began crafting interpretations so compelling they sometimes reached hundreds of thousands of people, often outperforming traditional literary criticism in terms of reach and impact. What made Tumblr different was its unique ability to nurture what fans called headcanons, personal interpretations that might not be explicitly stated in the text, but felt true to readers. These weren't just simple fan theories. They were often sophisticated readings that drew on historical context, literary theory, and personal experience to illuminate texts in new ways. Consider the phenomenon of marginalized readers finding their voices through alternative interpretations of classic literature. On Tumblr, readers began examining texts through lenses that traditional academia had often overlooked. Jane Austen's works, for instance, were re-examined through queer theory, disability studies, and post-colonial perspectives. These readings weren't just accepted, they went viral, with some posts gathering over 50,000 engagements. The platform's format encouraged what academics might call intertextual analysis, though Tumblr users simply called it connecting the dots. A reader might start with an observation about gender roles in Pride and Prejudice, connect it to similar patterns in Jane Eyre, and suddenly reveal a broader commentary about women's economic agency in 19th century literature. What made these interpretations particularly powerful was their collaborative nature. A post might begin with one reader's observation, but through reblogs and additions, it would evolve into a complex analytical framework that rivaled academic papers in depth and sophistication. Take the case of Shakespeare's works. Tumblr users began identifying patterns of queer coding in his plays, supporting their arguments with historical context about Elizabethan theater practices and contemporary gender expression. One particularly fascinating trend was how readers used Tumblr to challenge traditional power structures in literary interpretation. When marginalized readers shared their perspectives on classic texts, they weren't just offering new readings. They were actively reclaiming narratives that had historically excluded their viewpoints. The platform even developed its own form of peer review. Strong interpretations would be validated through notes and reblogs, while weaker ones would fade into obscurity. This created a new kind of meritocracy in literary analysis, where the strength of your interpretation mattered more than your academic credentials. What we witnessed on Tumblr was nothing less than a revolution in how we think about literary interpretation. It proved that thoughtful, nuanced literary analysis could come from anywhere, and that readers working collaboratively could develop insights that rivaled or surpassed traditional academic approaches. Perhaps most importantly, Tumblr demonstrated that literary interpretation didn't need to be gatekept by traditional academic institutions. When given the tools and platform to share their insights, readers proved capable of generating sophisticated, nuanced readings that expanded our understanding of both classic and contemporary texts. This democratization of literary analysis changed not just how we interpret texts, but who gets to participate in that interpretation. In doing so, it realized one of the core promises of Barth's Death of the Author, that texts truly could belong to their readers, all of their readers, in ways their authors might never have imagined. Today's readers face an unprecedented challenge. How do you engage with a text when you know too much about its creator? This isn't just an academic question. It's a practical dilemma that readers confront every time they open a book, scroll through Twitter, or join a literary discussion. Consider Harry Potter, a series that has become a fascinating case study in this modern dilemma. Millions of readers discovered profound messages about acceptance, equality, and fighting discrimination in these books. Then J.K. Rowling began sharing views on social media that many felt contradicted these very themes. This tension between reader interpretation and author identity has created what some scholars call interpretative whiplash. Readers discover powerful meanings in a text, only to have those meanings complicated or challenged by knowledge of the author's personal views, behaviors, or later statements. It's like finding a beautiful painting in a thrift store, falling in love with its meaning, then discovering the artist intended it to represent something that conflicts with your interpretation. Yet history shows us that great works often transcend their creator's intentions. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein was initially conceived as a simple ghost story for a friendly competition. Readers and critics found in it profound commentaries on scientific ethics, the nature of humanity, and the responsibilities of creation, themes that resonate even more powerfully in our age of artificial intelligence and genetic engineering. Similarly, Ray Bradbury insisted that Fahrenheit 451 was about the dangers of television, not censorship. Yet readers consistently found in it powerful warnings about governmental control of information and the importance of preserving knowledge, interpretations that proved particularly relevant in our digital age. This brings us to a central question of modern reading. Should we try to separate the art from the artist? The answer might lie in understanding that texts can hold multiple truths simultaneously. A book can contain both its author's intended meaning and the meanings readers discover. Consider the phenomenon of own voices reading, where readers from marginalized communities find representations of their experiences in texts written by authors who might never have intended such interpretations. These readings don't invalidate the author's original intent. They add new layers of meaning that make the text richer and more universal. The digital age has made this relationship more complicated, not less. Authors can now instantly respond to interpretations they disagree with, creating what one literary scholar called a perpetual tug-of-war over meaning. Perhaps the solution lies in embracing this complexity rather than trying to resolve it. Modern readers might need to develop what we could call interpretative dexterity, the ability to hold multiple meanings in mind simultaneously. This isn't about ignoring authors or their intentions. Instead, it's about understanding that great literature, like all great art, has the capacity to mean more than its creators intended. In an age where we know more about authors than ever before, this might be the key to preserving the magic of reading, acknowledging that books, once released into the world, belong not just to their creators, but to every reader who finds meaning in their pages. The future of reading isn't about finding definitive interpretations, but about embracing the complexity of how meaning is created and shared in our interconnected world. How might your interpretation of your favorite book change if you discovered its author held views you strongly disagree with? Think about the stories that shaped your worldview, the characters that felt like friends. Would knowing the author's controversial opinions retroactively change the meaning you found in those pages? In what ways do fan theories and communities contribute to or detract from literary analysis? Consider how collaborative interpretation through social media has democratized literary discussion, while also potentially creating echo chambers of agreed-upon meanings. Should authors have any say in how their work is interpreted after publication? Where do we draw the line between respecting creative intent and allowing texts to evolve with new readers and contexts? How has social media changed the way we engage with and interpret literature? Think about whether instant access to author commentary enhances or diminishes your reading experience. These questions don't have simple answers, but wrestling with them might help us become more thoughtful, nuanced readers in an age where the line between authors and audiences grows increasingly blurred.